Well, good afternoon. Very strange afternoon indeed. We saw something on the floor of the Minnesota House of Representatives today that we have never seen in Minnesota history, a completely sham proceeding. Republicans did not have a quorum. The Secretary of State has the authority to call the House to order. They completely ignored that and engaged in a sham proceeding unlike anything we could have imagined or have ever seen before. Representative Brad Tabke won this election. It was announced on election night. It was confirmed in the recounts. It was confirmed again by the district court this morning in a 44-page opinion that found there was no basis in law or fact for a special election. The decision could not have been more clear, and in fact, it was not surprising because anybody who followed the trial saw that it was demonstrated very clearly that Representative Tabke had won, and it was impossible for Aaron Paul to assert a successful election contest. Minnesotans voted for a 67-67 tie in the Minnesota House of Representatives. We worked for 60 days developing a shared power agreement because obviously in a 67-67 situation, with neither party having enough representatives to even convene the House or to pass a bill, we have to work together. In recent weeks, unfortunately, the Republicans have walked away from the negotiating table, instead asserting that they should exert complete control for 2 full years. We had to deny quorum to demonstrate the true legal reality that they cannot even convene the Minnesota House of Representatives without bipartisan collaboration. We are anxious to join them in proceedings on the House floor and in real committee activity. But in the meantime, we will be very busy in our legislative districts doing all the portions of our job that don't include traveling to St. Paul and attending session on the House floor. We will deny quorum for 3 important reasons. First of all, Representative Tabke won. And the Republicans made clear that they are going to try to kick him out of the House anyway. That is outrageous, untenable, has never happened in Minnesota history. Has never happened where somebody who got the most votes clearly won, the other party kicks them out just because they want to have a do-over. The second reason that we will continue to deny quorum is the will of the voters on election night was an equally divided House of Representatives, and we know we're going to return to that in the special election on January 28th when our 67th member is sworn in on February 3rd. So we have got to work together. That is the will of the voters. And the third reason we're doing this is just the practicality of getting a budget agreement by the end of session. The only way to get a budget enacted into law in Minnesota is to have a bipartisan group of folks working together in the Minnesota House, because Republicans don't have enough votes to pass a budget by themselves. Democrats don't have enough votes to pass a budget by themselves. The only way we can serve the people of Minnesota and put a budget in place for the next 2 years is to work together. It is the practical reality of our situation. As Representative Demuth and I said right after the election, she certainly would have preferred to get 68. I certainly would have preferred to get 68. But that's not what the voters gave us. The voters delivered a tie. Our job is to listen to the voters. The voters have the power to decide the power structure at the Minnesota State Capitol. They made a decision, and it has to be respected. With that, I'll turn it over to Representative Jamie Long.
Well, today we saw a really astonishing attempt to grab power in the Minnesota House. The House GOP took their oath of office, and then they promptly turned around and violated it. They violated it by ignoring Minnesota statutes and Minnesota Constitution in not recognizing that Steve Simon, under statute, was the one authorized to convene session to determine that there was not a quorum and then to adjourn. And then they violated by saying that they are going to ignore the ruling of a judge and kick out Representative Brad Tabke. Make no mistake, what we saw today was an attempted coup. This is the type of thing that we don't expect in Minnesota. We expect in third world countries. We expect from folks like Donald Trump on his actions on January 6th. But we are not here for us. We are here for our voters. We are here for the individuals of 54A who voted to seat Representative Brad Tabke. We are here for the voters in all of our district who sent us to the Capitol to work on their behalf to keep our lives more affordable, to make sure we're standing up to fight climate change, to make sure we're standing up for affordable housing, for affordable health care. Those are the reasons that we want to be back in the chamber working. And today, we had a very sad day in the state of Minnesota, but the fight is not over. Representative Tapke.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. So, Brad Tapke, State Representative for Shakopee 54A, and as former mayor of Shakopee and current State Representative for Shakopee, normally I would invite everybody and welcome you to Shakopee, but I'm just pissed off that you're all here today. It is really, really frustrating that we are at the place that we are at today because the Republicans are trying to steal the election from the voters of Shakopee. So I'll say that again. They're trying to steal the election from the voters in Shakopee. So we're surrounded here today by many of my colleagues in the Minnesota House who have courageously stood up to deny quorum. And the reason why we're denying quorum is if a single one of us entered that Capitol building today, we're also surrounded by folks who are voters here in Shakopee. If any of our members had entered the Capitol today, all of these voters, their vote would be revoked. The Minnesota House would have revoked our election here in Shakopee, and they would have sent it to a special election. We'd have to go through the entire process again. When we have a judge that ruled that we have a fully, that we won the election, it was slim, and I wish it had been more, but it simply wasn't, and we still won. And so by denying quorum today and by doing the work that we're doing here in each of our districts, we are upholding and making sure that we're holding firm for the voters of Shakopee, for the voters of Minnesota, and making sure that everyone here today is represented in the Minnesota House. And so I'm really honored that everyone's here to help share that message and to say how important it is that we have that representation in the Capitol. This is not just about me and about our election here. It's about the voters of Shakopee. We had 22,000 voters who voted in our election. And if the GOP goes forward the way that they're saying they're going to go forward, that is going to revoke the votes of 22,000 people. And we just can't stand for that. We can't let that happen. And we need to make sure we're doing everything to keep that from happening. And today we have a voter here with us who is from Shakopee 54A. I introduce Holly Johnson, who is a great resident of 54A.
Thanks. As you mentioned, my name's Holly Johnson. I have been a resident here in Shakopee for 18 years. I have voted in every election since moving here. Today, I, along with everyone here, are calling on Republicans to respect my vote, as well as the nearly 22,000 other Shakopee residents, and seat Representative Tapke. Failure to do so undermines democracy, and frankly, we deserve better.
We're happy to take your questions, and I could comment on the offer that I made Representative Dameth this morning, if that would. I guess I'll just quickly say that this morning we met again, and what I offered was that we would show up today. We would elect Representative Dameth Speaker of the House for real, in a real session, and that Republicans would then control the Minnesota House for the first 3 weeks during the time when they have the one-seat advantage, and that we would then revert to power sharing if the Democrats return to 67-67 as we expect on February 3rd. She was unwilling to accept that offer and would not agree to seat Representative Tapke. The best she could offer me today was that she wouldn't kick him out today, and so we had no choice but to deny quorum.
So
Questions?
next? Yeah, I heard Leader Long say you're not done yet. The lawyer leaders, I'm guessing there's more legal challenges ahead?
There are. I anticipate that there will be court actions filed either later today or tomorrow. And we'll just have to let those pleadings speak for themselves. I think there will be a number of suits being filed. And what I expect is that the Minnesota Supreme Court would find that the Minnesota House was not duly organized today, that Representatives Niska, Dameth, and others who participated in the sham session violated Minnesota state law and ignored the constitutional requirement of quorum.
And you go straight to the state Supreme Court on an expedited basis?
I believe so.
But what does expedited mean? Like, what is this timeline when this needs to get done so work can begin?
In 1971, when a case went up to the Minnesota Supreme Court coming out of a kerfuffle in the Minnesota Senate, it took them 10 days to decide.
Is Secretary Simon going to show up every day and say there's no quorum?
You'd have to ask him.
Do you expect him to? I mean, if he doesn't, then what happens?
Again, you'd have to ask him.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know you won't get into the filings, it sounds like, but on what grounds can you sue what they did? Because, you know, they could have appealed the quorum question. They did not do that. So what is the basis of what you're saying here?
I'm going to get out over my skis a little bit. We're going to, you know, we should wait for the pleadings. But what I will say is that the Minnesota Constitution has certain requirements for the legislature. One of the requirements of the legislature is that it has to have a quorum to do business. Quorum is absolutely clear in Minnesota law, and Secretary Simon's 2 letters really spelled out all the legal authority, making clear that that is the case. The Minnesota Supreme Court is the arbiter of what's constitutional in Minnesota, similar to the U.S. Supreme Court being the arbiter of what's constitutional in the U.S. Constitution. So because they are the arbiter of what's constitutional, I expect that they are the entity that will decide whether what House Republicans did today was constitutional or not. And I expect that they will find it was unconstitutional.
So would you call this a constitutional crisis, what happened today?
It seems to be, yes. I mean, I worked very hard to avoid this, and I was willing to go very far in negotiations, but there was just no there. I tried a number of things last night. We talked about different concepts of places we could go beyond even what I put on the table, and it was clear that none of that was welcome, and that Republicans were really wedded to this plan.
Can you detail how they kick out Representative Tabke? Is it a vote? What process is it? Detail to our viewers what that
Sure.
would look like if you say they'll go that way.
Right. So if we were to show up in a situation of 67-66, they would probably move to declare a vacancy in the district. And through procedural motions on the floor would make it very hard for us to fight that battle. When we return to 67-67, we're in a better position to protect the will of the voters here in Shakopee and ensure that Representative Tabke remains seated.
If the Supreme Court does rule how you would like, and then Roseville elects a Democrat to 40B, that would bring the House back to a tie. How do you expect negotiations to go? Like, what more can be offered? What more can be done with negotiations?
Well, I think by that point in time, we'll have a really good example of what's happening in the Minnesota Senate. And we'll be able to look over at what could have been in the Minnesota House for the same period of time. For these first 3 weeks, you know, Republicans had the potential to act like a majority for the next 20 days. Tomorrow it's 19 days. The next day is 18 days. And then what we're going to see in the Minnesota Senate, in contrast, is shared power, co-chairs, co-presidents. And we can look over at that. And on February 3rd, I think what we're going to decide is that would be a pretty fruitful way to go. In fact, that is what Leader Damath and I decided between November 5th and January 5th would be a fruitful way for the session to work.
So do you anticipate you are not going to show up every day from now until January 28th with a special election and then the results thereafter?
I made clear to Leader Damath today that I am available to negotiate anytime. And I think that we both owe an obligation to the people of the state of Minnesota to keep trying to resolve this dispute. Even though it looks difficult, it looks like we're not getting anywhere, we still should be meeting and talking and seeing what we can accomplish.
But barring any changes, that's your plan? Without any other negotiation, you will not be at the Capitol from now until February?
I hope that's not what's required to protect the will of the voters.
It looks like there's no progress made in these negotiations at all. Talking to Damath this afternoon, it didn't sound like she had budged at all. But is there, in your view, from either side, any kind of, I mean, you guys met for hours last night, you met again this morning, that's a wasted time, or was there actual progress?
No, we met from about 5:30 to about midnight last night, and actually, you know, at the beginning it was a little bit slow and both sides were stuck, but we had some really good conversations over the hours. You know, nonpartisan staff worked really hard to try to bring us together. They certainly did not want to see what happened on the House floor today. We thought that this morning, when the Tabke decision came out, that would be the thing that the Republicans needed to be able to come to the table and say, we'll respect the will of the voters. This is a clear decision. There's lots of evidence there. It's confirms what was already confirmed election night and in the recount, and we thought that that might give us an opportunity for a breakthrough. But when the best they could offer this morning was just that they wouldn't move to try to oust Representative Tabke today, that was a setback.
What about the look today? You know, the images that are going to go out all over the state, maybe the country, of a half-empty chamber and Democrats not showing up. What do you say about that image?
Well, we have seen this before in other chambers. I know we've seen these pictures of the Oregon Senate when the Republicans walked out to block climate change legislation, and we saw these pictures from Wisconsin when the Wisconsin Democratic senators left to block some anti-union legislation. And this is part of what people see when they see legislative battles. It's always messy. It's always ugly. That is kind of our system of politics, really, even since the founding. Remember, there was a guy who ran off with the bill to move the state capitol from St. Paul to St. Peter. He hid out in a bar for days and prevented that from happening. So it's not like legislative disagreements are new, and that kind of like messiness of lawmaking has been seen before. So I would imagine that Minnesotans are irritated with both of us. I would imagine that they're irritated with us for not being there, and I would imagine they're irritated with Republicans for wanting to throw out a duly elected member, especially on the day that the courts ruled that he clearly won.
And if I could, too, the two images that I think Minnesotans should also pay attention to are the voters of 54A who are standing here saying that they want their duly elected representative to be seated and to be legitimately able to represent them. And then the image of the Republicans literally pushing Steve Simon aside and walking up to take an illegitimate and illegal act. So I think those are two pretty stark images to contrast as well.
Is your caucus unified in denying quorum for however long it takes?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about if nothing breaks and the special election happens, it's a plus 20 Democrat seat, you get back to a tie, what's keeping Republicans from still trying to unseat Representative Tabke if Tabke cannot vote on his own self? That's what the law says.
The very first order of business under Minnesota Statute 3.05 is election of a presiding officer. So we will doom loop at presiding officer, and we will go 67-67 as long as it takes to protect Representative Tabke.
So you're saying that you can't even get to that point because what they did today is not a presiding officer?
Correct.
Given the shortened timeline of the session, essentially, can you share some specifics on issues, policies you're not going to be able to get to?
Minnesotans should rest assured that the session starts slowly. There's a lot of new members who learn about the state agencies. So the things that happen in the early weeks of session can still be happening. All the new members can learn about the state agencies and the budgets of each of the state agencies. I understand that the governor will be presenting his budget on Thursday. We can all take those really fat 3-ring binders and spend some time going through the budget. They have not only the budget, but they have detail about what each element of the agency does. And so in the beginning, we call it overview season, and all that overview work can still happen. The real intense lawmaking activities don't really happen until we get the governor's amended budget in the middle of March after the February forecast. So I think we anticipate the February forecast around February 28th, and that's kind of the unofficial real start to the legislative session.
And I'll just add, before we got to a position where the GOP walked back from their power sharing, our co-chairs were having really productive conversations about areas where we could have bipartisan work. There was conversations about good bipartisan work on affordable housing, on affordable childcare, on infrastructure. And so we know that there are areas that we can work together on and that we will be fighting for. And the Senate had the same choice, where they knew they were going to get to 67-67, or they were going to get to a tie at one point. And they chose, let's work together. The House GOP had that choice, and they walked away.
Republicans also, they don't dispute, it seems like, that, Simon starts this whole thing, right? But they're saying it is not in his authority to adjourn without a vote and make the call on quorum. So why are they incorrect?
There are there's 3 statutory provisions that I'm familiar with. There might be more. But Minnesota Statute 3.05, 3.06, and 5.05 clearly indicate in state law that it is the Secretary of State's job to preside over the House on the first day. As the presiding officer, until a presiding officer is elected, it is his responsibility to determine whether a quorum exists. And he did substantial legal research to find out what were the proper bounds of his role, and talked with nonpartisan experts, as well as doing a ton of legal research.
How much damage has this done to relationships across the aisle?
Well, I don't think it has to do any damage, right? This is not personal. We have a dispute about how to operate the Minnesota House, but we don't have a dispute with each other personally. So I don't think it has to damage relationships. In fact, you know, what Representative Long said is so important for people to know is there's a lot of good bipartisan conversations happening even now. There are a couple of Republican chairs, you know, part of one of Leader Damath's offers in the last 24 hours included a couple of the committees having co-chairs and having equal members. So there are Republicans who see the benefit of working together as a team.
What about damages to the voters? For weeks now, they've been hearing about the back and forth between the two parties instead of issues, policies, funding, support for the people.
We've been talking about issues and policies. I mean, I'm sure that they see the disagreement about the power sharing, but we have done tons of work to talk about a variety of issues, and Representative Long has been taking the lead on putting together our legislative package. Normally, what we would be doing tomorrow is having a press conference to unveil, you know, sort of our top 10 bills and our top priorities. Given we've been a little bit busy negotiating about other issues, you're not hearing as much about that, but that work is still going on. You see how many people there are here? I've been dealing with Representative Damath, and everybody else has been working on substantive issues.
Would you support an offer that has the creation of a farm committee like Republicans want?
In offers going back and forth, there was a point in time where we offered for that to exist and for it to be Republican controlled with for the full 2 years with the Republican majority. That was rejected.
Can we expect to hear those priorities tomorrow, as you mentioned?
Yes, we're planning. Stay tuned. We're hoping that we can get everybody back together and roll out our policy agenda.
Is this going to be home base?
Well, you know, I think as much as
I'm for it.
Yeah, Shakopee is like ground zero right now for where everything is going on and how we're able to get work done for Minnesota as it's going forward. You ask about damage being done to voters, like damage is being done to all the people that are here with us today, to the 22,000 voters who voted in Shakopee, and the Republicans are not allowing us to move forward with where we need to go in order to get the work done. And we just I want to work for Shakopee, and I want to work to make sure that everyone is represented, and we have to have an agreement in order to do that before we are able to sit down in the chambers together.
Thanks,
Can
everyone.
I ask one more question? Republicans, part of their argument for what they did is that you guys are acting under the assumption that the tie exists right now. Yes, it's a seat that favors Democrats, but they're saying it's arrogant to act like you are a tie right now. And so why should they not act on their majority then, if that's true? Or why should you be entitled to a power sharing agreement right now, if that's the case?
We did not propose to them that we should be in power sharing right now. In recognition of the fact that they currently have a one-seat advantage, that is why we offered total Republican control for 3 weeks, and that we would go in there and at least one of us would vote for Lisa Damath for Speaker. So we acknowledge that there is an imbalance right now, and they have an edge. They just don't have enough human beings to convene the House or to pass a bill. And in recognition of that fact, we would like them to recognize that they need us too. So we're happy to let them have control of the House for 3 weeks, and legitimate control. We would have given them legitimate control and legitimately elected a speaker. And that seems reasonable to me. Yes, they have an edge, so they're entitled to that. But then we will return to a tie. Representative Damath acknowledged in several media interviews that she fully expects that we'll return to a tie. I don't even know if they're competing in 40B. I mean, we're working pretty hard out there. We haven't really seen any Republican activity at all. We expect that we're going to return to 67 and 67. And in fact, a part of the offer was if we don't, they just stay in control. So we acknowledge there is an imbalance right now. But what we want to do is be set up to solve problems together when we get back to the tie. And we want the Republicans to acknowledge that it takes 68 votes to do anything in the Minnesota House of Representatives.
And just a point of clarification of where we should look for the filings, it would go directly to the Supreme Court.
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks for coming down to Shakopee.